Hi everyone, it's Miss Cascino here. Welcome to part one of our sewing lesson. Now today we're gonna make a little pouch out of felt, and I'm gonna teach you how to stitch, how to sew a button, how to sew some beads in order to start our next project, okay? But you gotta practice first. So here's how we're gonna do it. Everyone should have a supply bag that contains a long piece of felt, a few pins, probably 2 or 3, a sewing needle, a button, and some beads. Also, to start off, we're gonna need some thread and a little piece of folded paper, which you'll also see in your bag. All right, let's get started. Okay. Artists, today we're going to be making a pouch and learning how to do 2 types of stitches. We're going to be learning how to sew a button, make a buttonhole, and also sew on some decorative beads. First, we're going to take our long piece of felt and we're going to fold it up, but not all the way to the top, about 3/4 of the way. So as you can see, I folded it to here. Now, in order to keep this front part of our pouch in place, I'm going to take a pin. This is a pin that we use for sewing. It has a little tiny ball at the top that you can hold on to so you don't poke your finger. And we're going to stick the pin through both layers of our felt. All right, and then see how it came through the back? I'm going to bend the felt so it comes through almost like a mini stitch. Now these 2 pieces are held together by my pin. Pins are used in sewing to hold things in place until you finish stitching. Then you can take them out. So the most useful thing to know in sewing, I think, is how to thread a needle. Now, we're using thread that's a little bit thick. It's actually a lot of thin pieces of string that's twisted together. Now, you might use a needle someday that's a lot thinner than this with a tinier eye. An eye is the hole in the needle, or a piece of thread that's a lot thinner too. So today you might be like, oh, Miss Cascino, it's so easy. I just stick the thread through the eye of the needle. But I want to show you a little trick in case this gets frustrating, because sometimes the end of the thread gets fuzzy and it's hard to stick it through the eye of the needle. Today, we're going to take the little piece of folded paper in our supply bag. Now this is just this little sticky note paper cut into a square and a rectangle and then folded into a V. I'm gonna call this my hot dog bun. Now my hot dog bun needs a hot dog. So the end of my thread is my hot dog. And I'm gonna put it into the bun. Now I'm not gonna have the thread hang out because that would be strange hot dog if it hung out the end of my bun. So I'm gonna pull it so it's even with the end of my hot dog bun. See it in there? And I'm gonna pinch it closed with my finger and my thumb. Now I'm gonna take my needle in my other hand and I'm gonna take my hot dog bun with the hot dog inside, my thread, and I'm gonna just stick it right through the eye of the needle. And with the other hand, I'm gonna keep pinching and I'm gonna pull it through. Now my needle is threaded. Does everyone see that? So some people like to sew. See, now I'm taking my hot dog bun, I'm just tossing it aside. I don't need that anymore. Some people like to sew with a little tail of a thread coming out of their eye. And when they're sewing, they pinch their thumb and forefinger right where the eye of the needle is so it doesn't come out. I like to sew like this because my thread isn't too thick. It's not doubled up. Some people like to sew by pulling their thread all the way, even Steven, to the bottom so that the 2 bottom pieces of your thread are even. You can do it either way. It's fine. If you do it like this and tie a knot at the bottom of your thread, then you don't have to worry about your needle falling off. If you have a short tail, which I like better because my thread is thinner, it's not doubled up, then you do have to tie a knot at the bottom of your thread, not at the top where the tail is, at the bottom. okay, just like we would if it was doubled up, and just hold on to your threads. If the tail comes through, it's okay, just rethread it. All right, so I'm going to take the bottom of my thread and I'm gonna tie a knot, okay? Now the way I tie a knot is I make a loop that has an X at the bottom. Now with this loop, I'm gonna take the bottom of my thread, the end part right here, and I'm gonna stick it through my loop and pull it. There's my knot. Now if I'm sewing with fabric that has a tight weave, like this felt or even thinner, then I'm okay with just one knot. If I'm sewing with fabric that has loose weave, it has little holes you can see through it, you might want to tie a double knot to make it thicker so that it doesn't go through. I'll just show you how to do that in case you want to. You do it again. You make a loop with an X, and then you take your tail underneath and you stick it through your loop and pull it tight. Now I have a nice big knot. Okay, so the next step, now that I have my pouch that is pinned with the top that's gonna fold over and button later, I need to do a stitch around the edge. Now technically I don't have to stitch the folded part because that's already closed. Okay, but I'm gonna try my running stitch. Now a running stitch is a very common stitch in sewing. You're going to want to come up now to hide my knot so it doesn't show on the outside of my pouch. I'm gonna lift up the corner of my folded felt and I'm gonna put my needle right through the corner. Does everyone see that? It's coming up from underneath. And I'm gonna pull it until I feel a tug. Now, a common mistake of new sewers is that seamsters or seamstresses is that this tail isn't pulled until the knot is tight. So I'm gonna tuck that in now so no one can see it. Now I'm gonna start my running stitch. Now the way I like to think about this is my needle is a little dolphin, okay? And and my felt is the water. Now my dolphin likes to dive down through the top of the water, down, 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 all the way to the bottom of the ocean down here, pulling so that my stitch is tight. Okay, now I'm gonna come up. My dolphin is gonna swim up through the top of the water, through both layers of my felt. Can everyone see this? And I'm gonna pull, 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 pull until my dolphin jumps super high in the air, and this is tight on the back. I don't wanna leave any loose thread like that. I wanna make sure I pull it until my stitch is nice and tight. Okay, now my dolphin's on top of the water. It wants to dive back down. Make sure it dives back down close to the other stitch in a straight line through both layers of the felt. Pull your needle all the way through. You don't want to leave this loop just flopping around. Your dolphin goes all the way to the bottom of the ocean floor until this is tight, tight, tight. Now, if you pull it super tight, look what's going to happen. It's going to gather up and be kind of pleated like that, but we don't want that. We want to keep it loose enough where the fabric stays straight. If you do this by accident, it's okay. Just pull on your felt a little bit and straighten it out. Give it a little more space. Now my dolphin's underneath the water. You know, this is my water, it's underneath. So it wants to come up for some air. Notice my stitches are pretty close together, okay? They're not one big stitch, oh, I'm done. It's 1, 2, and there's little spaces in between, diving back down through both layers of the felt to come back down for my running stitch. Now I have 3 stitches, and if I look on the other side, I have 2 stitches and I'm about to make a third. It almost looks like a dashed line or a dotted line with a space in between, okay? Now my dolphin's coming back up. Now you'll know if you made a mistake on the running stitch, if your thread looks like that, that means you didn't go down and come back up from underneath. Instead, you went around the edge. Now, don't worry, that's actually another type of stitch. That's the next stitch we're learning, okay? That's called the overcast stitch because it goes over the edge. We're not doing that. And if you mess up and you get tangled or a knot happens, try not to get frustrated. You can just clip your thread and tie a knot and start again if it's really hard to get it back to where you were before, or you can actually swim backwards. Your dolphin can swim backwards by going back through the hole, okay? You can try both. But the great thing with sewing is if you get tangled, you can always cut your thread, tie a knot so it doesn't go through, and start over with a new piece of thread. All right, so I'm gonna keep doing my running stitch all the way through. Okay, great. Now it's time to tie a knot here. I don't need to sew here because it's already closed. I folded it, okay? This is the opening of my pouch right here. So the way I'm gonna tie a knot is I'm gonna come up for one last stitch, okay? I'm gonna come back down through the back. Now you can do this once you get to be an expert. You can tie your knot inside your fabric, but I'm gonna show you on the outside just so you can see. I'm gonna take my needle that's still threaded. Whoop, I almost lost my tail. I did lose my tail. No problem. Just stick it back through there. All right. It happens all the time. If you lose your tail, don't panic, just rethread your needle. Now I'm gonna take my needle and I'm gonna go through, I'm gonna make like a tiny little mini stitch. Everybody see that? You can also go through your last stitch. You're basically tying a knot with your needle, and now watch. Instead of pulling this all the way through, there's my loop. It's a little twisted, but there's a loop. I'm gonna take my needle and I'm gonna go through my loop before I tighten it all the way. Now I've just tied a knot. Okay, if you wanna do that twice, you can do that twice. All right? If you do it twice, that makes it extra strong so it doesn't come out. So I'm gonna do it twice. I'm making a tiny little mini stitch, and right before I pull it tight, I'm sticking my needle through the loop and nice and tight. Now I can clip it. You're gonna wanna have some scissors on hand. All right, now notice I didn't clip it right up against the knot because it could come undone. I left a little tail, okay? And when we get really good, we can hide our knot inside of our fabric, okay? And I'll show you how to do that with the next project. So there's my running stitch going down the side of my pocket, but this side's still open. So let me teach you how to do the whip stitch. Okay, time for the whip stitch. Now I cut my thread when I tied my knot on the back of this. So I can keep the same thread. I still have a lot left over, but I need to tie a knot in the bottom of my thread again. So again, I make an X, right, that causes a loop, and then I take my tail and I stick it through the loop to tie my knot. Okay, and I'm gonna do a double knot just so make sure it doesn't pull through my fabric, my felt. There we go, now it's a strong knot. So here my needle is threaded with a tail that I hold on to when I sew so it doesn't go through. And there's my knot, all right? So here's my pouch. I did my running stitch. Now I'm gonna start my whip stitch, okay? So my whip stitch, I can start on either side. I can start the same way I did before up here, or I can start here. I'm gonna start here this time, all right? So I'm gonna hide my knot by going only through one layer of felt, okay, the top layer. And watch when I pull it, it'll be tucked inside there so nobody can see it, all right? But I do have to go through 2 layers of felt the rest of my stitching, or else it'll be open and things will fall out of my pouch. So the whip stitch, instead of going down through the water with my dolphin going all the way to the bottom of the ocean and back up for air, my dolphin, my needle, is gonna go around the edge and up through the back of my pouch, the side of my pouch. Now this first loop, I gotta make sure it's in the right spot. When I pull it, you're gonna see it hugs the edge of my pouch together. You see that? Now, instead of going down like this, I'm gonna go back around, okay? Back around and up from underneath again. Now, in the beginning, you just gotta make sure your needle doesn't go through the loop or else you end up tying a knot. All right, and you can guide it with your fingers so they kind of start out nice and neat. Does everyone see that? Now I'm on the top again. I'm always on the top with the whip stitch. My thread's always coming up from the water, and I'm gonna dive over the edge. Always stay to the left of your thread. If you go to the right, it ties a knot through your loop. Okay, now see this? This is a really good view of how the whip stitch is gonna come together. You see how it hugs the edge? Now it's really nice because it closes up the pouch and doesn't let anything fall out. Now instead of going down right here, I'm going to dive over the edge and back up through the water, like this. My thread is always on the right of my needle and pulling it nice and tight. Now, it's funny because when people do the running stitch, a lot of times by accident, they forget to go up and then back down, so they end up doing this whip stitch, which is okay too. You could do either one, okay? Either one works. Just practice both so you know how to do them, because they look different. When you turn your fabric inside out when you're making your stuffed animal later, or your bag, this stitch is invisible when you turn it inside out, but this one you can see. And I'll explain later why you want to turn things inside out, but right now, we'll just focus on the pouch and we'll be able to see our stitching and know that we're doing it right. All right, so there's my whip stitch. I'm gonna finish this up. You can watch me and then I'll show you how to sew a button. Okay, now again, I want to tie a knot. So I'm going to come in through the back. I finished my whip stitch. It's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be, don't worry. Okay, everyone's stitches look a little different. Just like everyone's art looks a little bit different. I'm going to make a little mini stitch right here. And before I pull it all the way through, I'm going to stick my needle through my loop to tie that knot. Oops. It's funny. I did something weird. Okay, now that I've practiced my running stitch and my whip stitch over the edge, I can take my pin out because I don't need to hold it anymore. Now my pocket is looking good. I can put anything in there and it's not gonna fall out. But I do wanna sew my top down. And how am I gonna do that? I don't wanna sew a stitch here because then I can't open it. So I'm gonna use a button. Now there's a few kinds of buttons, okay? There's a kind with 2 holes, and there's also kinds with 4 holes. Okay, you might have one of each in your pouch, I'm not sure. I'm gonna use the 4 hole so you can see how I do this. Now my button's gonna go here on the inside of my flap, and when I put this down, you can't see it, but I'm gonna cut a little slit right here so it peeks through, okay? After I sew it. So my first step is I'm gonna take some thread, and I'm gonna use red thread so that you can see what I'm doing here. I'm gonna unwind about an arm's length, okay? And then I'm gonna cut the end with my scissors. And I'm gonna, one side, thread my needle. Again, you can use the hot dog bun, putting your hot dog inside, squeezing it tight, just having it barely peek out the end, putting it through your needle like this, and then pulling it so you have a tail. Let go of your hot dog bun, and let's tie a knot at the end of our fabric, at the end of our thread, like this. There we go. Sometimes I like to do a double knot so it doesn't pull through my felt by accident. And there we go. All right, so to hide my knot, I'm always hiding my knots, okay, because I don't really like the way they look, okay? So when I sew my button right here, I'm not gonna sew through 2 levels of fabric, because if I do that, I'm gonna sew my pouch shut. I won't be able to put anything inside, okay? So I'm only gonna sew through this top layer right here, all right? So the way I do that is I'm gonna take my needle, I'm gonna put it through around where I want my button to be. Everyone see that? Just 1 layer, not both. And I'm gonna pull it through until I feel that tug of my knot, okay? If I don't pull it through, I'll have an extra thread under there. So I'm pulling it through until I feel that tug. Now I'm gonna take the tip of my needle and my button, and I'm gonna make sure my button, see the framer on the edge? I want that facing up. If I go this side, it's just flat, but this side has a little decorative frame. I'm gonna put it in any of the holes and let it drop, and sometimes I gotta wiggle it. Drop all the way to the bottom so it hits my felt. See, here's my needle, right? And I just put it on the top of my needle and let it fall all the way to the felt. Now, instead of going straight up or straight down or straight across here or here, I'm gonna go diagonal. Diagonal is you go from one corner to the other. And I'm gonna go down. My dolphin just came up through the water, see? I'm on top of my water felt. So now I'm gonna go down through the corner like this. Now only through the top piece of felt, not both pieces of felt, or else I'll sew my pouch closed with my powerful stitches. So now I'm gonna wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. I'm gonna pull this through, and it's okay if it looks messy at first, because watch, it looks like a mess right now, right? When I pull this through, boop, I have a stitch and it goes from corner hole to corner hole. Now I'm under the water. Oh my goodness, my scissors. All right, so now I'm under the water. My dolphin's under the water. I'm gonna come back up through an empty hole. Now sometimes it's hard to find that. So it's okay, you can peek and have it come up through the felt, the tip of your needle, and then you can put it right through the hole like that if you can't find it, okay? Now I'm gonna pull, wiggle, 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 get it through, pull. Now this stitch is tight and I'm up above the water, and I'm gonna dive down through the last empty hole, which is diagonal. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to pull, pull, pull. Sometimes it gets a little tight. That's okay, make sure your needle fits through your holes before you start. Now I've made an X. Everyone see my X? Now, if you're walking down the street and you got a button on your pants and it pops off, it's probably because someone only did 1 X. So we want to do 2 X's to make sure it's strong. So I'm going to come back from underneath here. And you might have to peek, it's okay. See, look, I'm sticking it through 1 level and then I'm just sticking it through the hole. All right, pulling it up. Now I'm going to go diagonal. Same direction I went before, same stitches, making my X only through 1 level of fabric, 1 level of felt. If it gets caught on the corner, no biggie, just untangle it. The thing about sewing is everything gets tangled. Don't get frustrated. Just cut it, start over. You can just pull your thread out if it's a big mess. So if it looks like Spider-Man hit up your piece, it's okay. Just start again, pull it out, no biggie. Now my last double stitch is gonna be coming up through the corner and back down. Now some people sew their buttons on and they get all mixed up and they actually sew it around the edge like this. You see that? If yours looks like this, you want to undo it. You only want to be going up and down through the holes. You don't want it to come around the edge of your felt. All right. All right, I'm doing my last stitch here. If it gets caught on the corner, just pull it. Now I got a really strong X of stitching, and my last thing here before I cut my thread is I need to tie a knot, and the knot's gonna be on the inside, okay? See how it's coming up? Now, a way you can do it is, again, you can do a little mini stitch or just go through one of your other stitches on the back where it's a little messy because no one gets to see that, it's fine, okay? Pull it through, and before that loop gets all the way pulled through, see my loop? I'm gonna stick my needle through the hoop, boop, nice and tight. And you can do that twice. Okay, just stick it right through this big messy tangle of fabric. You're basically just tying a knot with your needle. I almost lost my tail. See, I'll pull through. Okay, and before that little loop gets closed, stick your needle through the loop and tie that knot. Now I got a nice strong knot on the back. I'm gonna take my scissors. Never cut it too close to the knot because it could come undone. Okay, leave a little tail and make it neat. See, I have this tail left over from my other knot too. I'm gonna trim that a little bit. It doesn't need to be that long. All right, guys, there is my button sewed on. Okay, the next part is going to be cutting the slit where my button is going to pop through. Now, it's pretty easy, but you can never go backwards from cutting too much. You only can cut a little more. So make sure you're very conservative, or basically another word for conservative is make sure you start with just a tiny, tiny bit and get bigger and bigger if you need it, okay? You'll be surprised you don't need a big slit. I'm gonna fold this over, right? So I folded this little flap in half, you see that? And then I'm gonna open up my scissors and I'm just gonna cut a tiny little slit. You see that? I didn't go all the way through to the edge. I cut a tiny little slit. It's probably like 1/4 of an inch, okay? And I'll show you like this. You see how I just cut this tiny little piece? And when I open it, oh, I don't think that's gonna be big enough. So let me try it, because I can always cut more, but I can't cut less, right? It's not self-healing. So I'm gonna cut a little more. I just wanna make sure that I don't go through to the edge of this though, because then I just have 2 flappy pieces. All right, guys, see this? Some people like to sew a whip stitch around the edges of their buttonhole so it stays strong and it doesn't rip. Now let's see if this works. I'm gonna take my hole and I'm gonna put the button right through. Ah, perfect. Now if you want, I'm gonna show you this, you can decorate it with some beads, and I'm gonna show you how to sew that next. Okay, artists, my sewers, here's what we're gonna do. Here's what we're gonna do. Here is 2 beads. I'm gonna sew them on for decoration here and here. I'm gonna thread my needle again and tie a knot. Don't forget to tie that knot. Everyone always forgets and does a nice stitch and then it comes whoop, right through the felt. Okay, so I like to do a double knot. All right, there's my needle with my tail and thread. Okay, now the way I'm gonna sew my buttons here, my beads here, you could sew them anywhere you want, okay? But I'm gonna sew them on the flap. All right, so I'm gonna actually undo my buttonhole for now, because it might be easier to sew. Okay, see my flap? So I'm not gonna sew it on the inside because then nobody can see my beads. Okay, I'm gonna sew it on the outside. On the outside, this side that doesn't have the button on it. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stick my needle in the spot, just like with the button, in the spot I want the bead. I'm gonna pull it up till I feel that tug, okay? Now, just like the button, I'm gonna take the bead and put it on the end of my needle. Now my thread is coming up out of the water. The felt is my water, okay? I put the bead on my needle and just let it drop all the way down. Okay, now the slight difference is you're not gonna go back through the hole because basically you'll just be unsewing your button. It won't stay. You need to make a little loop of thread over the edge of your button to keep it nice and strong on there. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your needle, you're gonna, you can let this fall down a little bit. You're gonna make a tiny little stitch next to where you came up. And I apologize if this is hard to see with the red thread. All right, and when I pull that stitch, it should hold my bead in place. And if you want, you can kind of flip your bead so you don't see the thread. You see that? Or some people like it on the side like this. It's up to you. Okay, and that's how I'm gonna sew my bead. And any size bead, you sew it the same way, okay? Now, just like with the button, I like to do a double stitch. So I'm gonna come up, you can come up through your button if you want, okay? I like to come up next to where the first stitch was. And then I like to go down through the button. You see that? I'm making one more stitch, pulling it tight, okay? And then on the other side, you'll see my knot. All right, I'm gonna make a tiny mini stitch to make my knot so nothing goes through, okay? I made a knot on one side of the thread. Now I'm gonna stick my needle through my loop for my mini stitch, pull it nice and tight, okay? And then I'm gonna cut the end, and I'll cut this a little shorter too. All right, now I have a bead on my pouch. All right, so there you go. And if you want, you can sew on the other bead over here, or however you like it. Some people like to do one thread with a bead and then maybe put more than one bead on. That's cool too. You could do that. All right. Thanks, artist. Can't wait to work on the next sewing project with you. Bye.